Hello, I am Iwo Borkowicz. Thank you for inviting me here. I'll start by saying that I really feel like something out of this program that does not belong, because these people that are going to speak after and spoke before me are still established, and we started JEJU.studio because it's pronounced like this in Polish. It's JESU in a sense. Just not even 2 years ago, but I'm super proud to say that we just hired our second person. He's gonna start on Monday, so I'm super excited. I'll not be the only one to draw all the cut lines from now on. Adam, my associate, couldn't join us. He's in Tanzania now. We have a very difficult project there. He's trying to save it, but it's a topic for a different, I guess, presentation. When I look at the topic of today's symposium, I have to be honest, I did it for the first time. I looked back at the topics that we cover and was actually surprised that most of our projects deal with existing fabrics, and we never said to be that way. We never wanted to be that way. We really enjoy projects that deal with something that is existing, but it turns out, as was said yesterday on the opening of the exhibition, that actually that's mostly the case, and it was compared to the situation in education where I think 85% of the topics we do is projects that deal with existing, and in the university it was 85 of tabula rasa and maybe 15 of the ones that we actually do, so it's a curious reversed proportion. We deal with small things like, for example, this is a thing we are doing with an old, really poor quality shed built in the 90s. We're now transforming into a small event space / restaurant thing, and we took it apart because we started excavating the walls, and it turns out this just like rotten paper, nothing in it, but there's this weak structure that we then reinforced with additional structure. We chose a different material to highlight that and played around with it. We also made it a bit longer and played it in this way with different colors, and so we deal with this material and kind of try to be playful with the old, I would have to say, and I'm sorry for the word, shitty building that was built really poorly with really poor materials, and try to still find value to it instead of. All right, I'll be happy to be a bit slower, but I'm on the same clock as the first presentation, so there's not much left. So we still, the investor thought about demolishing it. We thought it's not good, but let's see. And we're actually probably gonna end up keeping most of it. Another funny project we're doing now, it's an old, really bad aquarium exhibition in a historic building, and we just got commissioned to do a new one. It's for the next presentation that I will come here to hopefully show in 2 years, because before I was an architect, I was a professional aquarium maker, so it's, I'm not going to show you a design, but I'm super proud I'm doing it, so I just wanted to share it because it's a fresh thing, and it's also dealing with existing. And our recent big thing, we just got commissioned along with 2 other offices to work in this area and refurbish the whole old slaughtery in Poznan, and we decided to be very connected to it in the most simple sense, and we moved to the building on the right bottom side. You can see a window that I'm sitting at. As we spoke yesterday about this quality of architecture that you do when you're actually there, so we moved into the space that we're changing. Back to the Tanzania for a second, because this seemed to be a kind of tabula rasa situation for us when we came, because we had a very big plot that we could choose where to position a school that we were to design there. It's in Ulayankulu, refugee settlement, and we were trying for a couple of months, and we couldn't figure out something that we actually liked until we decided that it's not a tabula rasa, and the only thing we could tie it to, we thought at the beginning was the biggest group of trees, and ended up being the center of the design. But then even with the material itself, all the bricks for the whole construction are built on site, and we're done now with burning all of them. So again, not from the starting point in any of our designs, but when I look back, the re-architecture topic is just in our work all the time, and I think it's not just us, it's just an extremely important topic to talk about. But I was invited here to talk about this one, my master thesis that allowed me later to maybe start a practice because it got some exposure that we're trying to utilize as much as we can. And it's about reusing something, but in a non-material way. So we are trying to reuse bricks, reuse beams or any other thing, but this one is trying to reinvent, reuse systems, like social, economical, or political ones. It's idle to say that combinations of old elements cannot be inventions. This is a quote from a court ruling of Robert Kearns against Ford Motors in the 70s. Robert Kearns invented intermittent wipers, so the wipers that can move in different speeds. And then he proposed it to automotive companies. They said no, but then they stole actually the design from him, almost all of them. And he fought them for, I think, 3 decades until he won the case, because the court ruling and the reality shows that these kind of inventions that are based on off-shelf components or on existing elements are proving to be extremely resilient and can be implemented right away, as all the elements that you need to build whatever you invented exist already. So it's this kind of thought that led me through the design I'm going to show. It was 2015 when I spent a couple of months in Havana researching this very complex and dynamically changing environment. We all know Cuba is changing. I myself was a witness to the reopening of the American embassy or opening of the first public hotspot ever on the island. But Cuba is at the same time struggling with really many issues, and one of the biggest one is the housing shortage. It's estimated that 1/3 of the country is awaiting housing, and housing in Cuba is considered a right. And neither before the revolution nor after the revolution this issue was addressed with any major success. There's no homelessness per se in Cuba, but people are just pushed into already overcrowded houses, leading to very unhealthy living conditions and densities, and often collapses of buildings. Some people are desperate enough they choose to move out of these overcrowded houses and try to inhabit long abandoned ruins in an attempt of making it their home with very limited budgets. On the other side, in the same place, we know that the touristic boom is taking place, and there is a shortage of hotel units visible as well. This is Havana Vieja, the old town. It's the second densest and the oldest housing district of Cuba. And it deals with the highest problem of deterioration of its built fabric. Over half of its buildings are threatened by collapse, and many collapsed already. It was recently flooded severely again, so the problem is going to grow. But on top of that, I think the biggest threat to the original character of this originally housing district is the touristic pressure that is leading to a very rapid gentrification of this area, and may soon lead, and is already leading its original inhabitants to move out to the outskirts of Havana, cutting them off from the possibility of being a part of this lucrative touristic economy. Cuba is changing, and it's changing really fast. I think next 10 or 20 years will shape this country's future, and especially in regions where the tourism is very active, and Havana Vieja is the first example of that. So I was trying to figure out how to use what's already there in a different way that will become a tool that could address said issues. So Cubans do not build housing or renovate houses purely because they just don't have the money to do so. But on the other hand, the hotel industry does not suffer from financial issues at all, but it's rightfully not allowed to grow freely, especially in Havana Vieja, as the impact of mass tourism can be very dangerous if invited on wrong terms, both architecturally and economically. And I think Cuba is right to kind of keep the hotels from invading too much, but on the other hand, they are not utilizing the potential in it fully, I think. So I think one could imagine buildings in areas that are attracting tourists that will consist of both regular flats for Cubans and a proportionate number of hotel units weaved into them. These hotel units would generate the money to pay off for the loan that was taken for the construction of this building itself. Cuban inhabitants would take care for guests and make steady living. In some years, the hotel demand in Havana will peak and then decline a little and stabilize. If we were to build enough hotels to satisfy the peak demand, after 2 or 3 decades, a lot of these buildings would become obsolete, and it's not a sustainable model. In the model I put forward, these hotel units weaved into social housing are spatially pre-designed to easily accommodate this dynamic by being able to freely merge after the demand is no longer there, creating new apartments, on one hand, helping to accommodate the dynamic, and on the other hand, further to help to ease the housing crisis. The other existing elements, and most of them are not material, are more like social or political, is, for example, the culture of cooperatives that was developed in Cuba in recent decades. The new self-employed sector of the economy. Since 7 years ago, Cubans can move into self-employment, and it's a very popular choice. These are very small kind of entrepreneurs, but I think it's a sector that needs stimulation and will shape economical future of Cuba. And the political reality is also playing a role here, that Cuban government prefers that everybody gets a little instead of one group getting a lot. Also, Office of the City Historian is a very interesting initiative. They pioneered the system of redirecting the touristic income into social investment. And the last piece of this puzzle is the Casa Particulares system, quite famous now, a Cuban Airbnb kind of, but it was done before Airbnb existed. In 1990, Cubans were allowed to rent rooms for tourists for the first time, and they are still doing so. And I think it's beneficial not only from the financial point of view that they can make extra cash, but it's just changing also the relation between like a hotel worker and a tourist into like a host and a guest situation that is beneficial for both sides. But the money was the issue here. So would that kind of building be feasible? So I was trying to achieve this, and this is what I came up with. 70 square meters of social housing if it was balanced with 20 square meters of guest rooms. And if we were to charge only 50 nights per a night in a historic center of Havana, and only 50% of the nights would be booked, where now hotels in the historic center are booked for weeks in advance, where 80% of the income would go to paying of the loan, and then the 10% will consist of wages for Cubans, where 2 people in each family living in a building will get wages 4 times greater than today's official average. And if we agree that we can build the social housing in Cuba with cheap labor force and so on within $1,000 per square meter, the payoff time of this kind of building will be 7 years. So the payoff of a social housing is something not common and positive, but a quick payoff is even more interesting. Of course, if the loan would not be governmental loan, but an outside loan, you have interest and maybe some unexpected cost. But I think it's safe to say, depending on circumstances, that this kind of buildings will be able to pay themselves off within this context in around under 10 years. There's a lot of collapsed buildings, there is a lot of empty plots in Havana Vieja, so this is trying not only to address the housing shortage and the hotel shortage, but also through that rebuild the city center of the old city. I'm also trying to implement a small twist, kind of like Aravena style, that all the structural elements, the permanent elements, like a facade structure, placement of patios, staircases, and technical shafts are designed by an architect and then executed by a national construction company, as it is in Cuba, for efficiency and the quality of it. But then a portion of the loan, of the big budget of the loan, is given to each future tenant, and they're responsible for executing their own apartments. And this is done for 2 reasons. One, as Aravena does, it's good to be able to shape your lived environment, it's good to be a part of the project, to feel a part of it from the beginning, but in this context also, it leads to one more consequence, like in order to execute these apartments, these people would need to hire like brick workers, somebody to lay tiles, electricity, and other things, and who will they hire? They need to go to the new self-employed sector of the economy, stimulating it, and I really believe that this sector of the economy within the reality of Cuba will be extremely important in the future. So a trickle down from a big budget to these small entrepreneurs is possible. To test this idea, I designed a couple of prototypes in southern part of Havana Vieja, different shapes and sizes in urban context to see how spatially it can work out. They all follow a set of guidelines to say, for example, we should use very simple structures that utilize some technologies that Cubans are used to. The most important rule that I already mentioned, hotel units will need to be pre-designed to later become housing when the loan is paid off and the demand is no longer there. 20% of each plot should stay open air. It's based on a very extensive study of Havana Vieja's ventilation that suggested minimum of 15%. We want to be more generous with that here. We connect all the patios with an open ground floor to enhance the ventilation even more. Then the open ground floor and the rooftop becomes a collective space for both tenants and the guests to socialize. And we have also some economic zone in the front of the building that addresses these self-employed people with very small economic rooms to rent, and even some places for street sellers, as there is no infrastructure for them in Havana Vieja at the moment, but it's a very common thing to do after work, where you work picking avocados, you pick 5 more. After work, you bring it in your backpack and sell it on the street. It results with this approach, for example, with funny things I think that could happen. The front facade designed by an architect will be living next to a emergent inner facade that is an outcome of the co-design process with the future tenants. These buildings, I think, could capitalize and use human handcraft, include passive cooling methods, and maximize airflow as efficiently as they can. This is one of these buildings, for example, that follow these rules and is trying to realize this idea. This is a small off-topic, but it was something that I fell in love in when I was in Havana. For example, the question about the color of the facade that does not connect to those big system-based design rules, but it's just too funny and too beautiful not to show. Cubans reuse their facades in an extremely playful and imaginative way. It's also caused by the fact that the quality of paint that is available is super low, so they have to repaint it every couple of years. I think it's beautiful. That's why I never chose any. They will change it after a couple of years, like they did here. I came, the building on the right was red, 2 weeks later it was blue. Everybody was happy, and the happiest person there was me, to see that you can have fun with heritage and it's still as beautiful as it gets. Cubans do not have a lot of living space in their apartments because of this situation with the housing shortage, so they socialize mostly on the streets. That's why all these prototypes are trying to create a very vibrant relation between the streetscape and the open common ground floor through this small economical zone where under a columnade you have these benches where street sellers can work, but later in the evening they could become these places where they play domino. And it's quite a simple, straightforward design. All the buildings came with multiplicity of plans, but the last decision about the plan is always in a tenant's hand. But it was just to prove the flexibility of the plan. So for example, here we have 2 apartments, one on the top, one on the bottom, and 2 hotel units in the middle. Later on, with no problem, we go and have a 3rd apartment, or we can incorporate the hotel units and expand the existing apartments as the family is inhabiting it are growing. Or we could imagine 4 hotel units, 1 apartment. The bottom line is that the building needs to be designed in such a way that it's flexible, and from the get-go it maintains the proportion between hotel units and social housing that will allow for the desired payoff time, that we can reinvest that loan maybe on the different streets and keep rebuilding and Havana Vieja, and also supplying the needed housing. It's an architectural. It's not an architectural model. It's a socio-economical one, but I did approach it, and I think extraordinary context of Havana Vieja requires extraordinary approaches, and these buildings could be extremely simple and utilize on existing handcraft and habits and kind of blend in Havana Vieja, and their mission is more to be there at all than to excite as a unit. So to finalize, I think this project is like, I did not invent anything. Everything there exists already, but I think in such a complex context and with such a great need that needs to be addressed as soon as possible, the tactic to use what's already there, just twist it a little, mix it a little, is the one that could work very well. And I know that there is a multiplicity of ideas needed to help Cuba in general, but I hope this one could just become one of those tools. Not only maybe for Cubans, maybe other cities in the world could use it similarly, and simply help a little with these areas that are struggling with similar issues. Thank you.